Where are we now as a nation? We are as divided as we have ever been in my lifetime, and I can tell you right now, I was born before Kennedy got shot, and I was in school when MLK was assassinated. So I have a personal historical reference point in this matter. It is almost impossible to have a conversation about reform, inequality, injustice, about race, without causing some sort of discourse or a fight or to have a meaningful and productive outcome. And the reason for that is that a lot of people don't realize that the missing component is understanding the difference between equity and equality. Equality by itself is divisive. I'll say that again. Equality by itself is divisive. It has to be paired with equity for it to have the meaning that we intended to have. So let me give you an example. There are three friends. They love baseball. They're passionate about it. They share the passion for the same team. The team is playing in the championship, and the barrier for them to enjoy what they love most as a group is a 7-foot fence. One of the guys is 4 feet tall, one guy is 5 feet, and the other guy is 6 feet. Equality is each one of them get a step stool that's 2 feet high. So the 4-foot guy has a 6-foot view. He's a foot short. The 5-foot guy has a 7-foot view. He can't see over. The 6-foot guy is 8 foot, so he has a 1-foot clearance, and he's fine. That's equality. But the outcomes are not equitable. Equitable inputs is this. The 4-foot guy gets a 4-foot stool. The 5-foot guy gets a 3-foot stool. The 6-foot guy gets a 2-foot stool. And they all have a foot worth of clearance. That's what equity can do for you. The majority of my career has been working for Fortune 500 companies in the food and beverage industry. I have held senior management roles, and I've done this at a regional level and at a national level, and the majority of my time was spent teaching leaders how to construct conversations that had equitable outputs. How do we have a conversation where everybody walks away with something and that we are realigned and have a way forward? These companies that I work for, every work group was all on the same page about what the company goals were. But when you are set up in such a way that you have a corporate building in one city and remote operations throughout the country, sometimes there are misalignments. Finance, marketing, human resources may start an initiative and have an unintended impact on operations. My job was to teach groups how to come to the table and find a way forward. And what we taught them was an acronym called HOURS. We needed to make it an hour conversation. So HOURS stood for this. The O was, what are you observing? What are you analyzing? What are you looking at? U was, do you understand what you're analyzing, what you're looking at? And the third one, the key component was, now that you know this, how do you choose to respond? A couple of months ago, I started a company called the Jonesboro Business Association, and our mission and vision is to empower and strengthen the lives of the marginalized in our community. We conducted a workshop a couple of weeks ago where we tackled the question of, can we get to a common ground for common solutions around race relations? The attendees were a great cross-section of our community. There were different ages represented, different lifestyles represented, different ethnicities were represented, and different professions across a wide range of industries. The exercise that we took them through was we broke them into smaller groups and put them in separate work areas where they could not see each other. We gave each group the same materials for a project which was to build the tallest structure that they could with what they had. Each group was given a set of instructions, but those instructions were administered differently between each group. We came together to discuss and show what we had come up with and determine who the winner was, even though it was obvious because once you put out there the tallest structure won. As they talked and they presented their information, it became evident to everybody that the way that the instructions were administered, it gave an advantage to one group over another, which affected the outcome or how they built their structure. Now that they observed and they understood, there was a choice that they needed to make about how they wanted to respond. And there's only two choices. Either I'm going to respond with empathy or I am going to respond with sympathy. And two of those reactions, each one of them has a different outcome. This particular group, once they understood what they did and what they were going through, there was a connection that was formed, there was a bond that was formed, and they looked at each other's work differently. They responded with empathy because what they decided and what they talked about was, wow, with the limited resources that you had, I'm giving you credit for your ingenuity of what you put together. It may not be the tallest, but what you had to work with, this is phenomenal. How they reacted to the person who had the group that had the most resources was a little bit different because they felt that they could have done more with what they had. That's the difference when you meet a group with empathy versus sympathy. After we got to that point, we started to tackle some of the more difficult questions that faced this nation when it comes to race relations. One of the questions that we asked was, how do you feel about kneeling? 80% of the respondents said that they would not kneel for the national anthem, but would defend the rights of those who chose to. Please note that there were military veterans that participated in this. Another question that we had asked was about Black Lives Matter. Does Black Lives Matter mean more than all lives matter? And the answer was this: Black Lives Matter does not mean more than all lives matter, but all lives matter means less if Black lives don't matter. That was productive, and that was meaningful. The end result was this group decided that for us to move forward as a society, that we needed to have more conversations, and we needed to be taught how to have those conversations so they are impactful and we can move forward as a nation. So I'd like to share with you two stories with two different outcomes that happened to me personally. I come from a typical black family. I had mom and dad. I'm the youngest of three. And when I say typical black family, what I'm telling you is that we were headed by a very strong matriarch, my mother. Clarice Burrell was a teacher not only of academics, but of life. She was a self-proclaimed fighter. My mom thought that she could fight, but I don't think she really had hands. But what she taught me was a few things that carry me to this day. One, she says, be strong in your faith. She said, always tell the truth to the man in the mirror. Fight injustice with all that you have. She said, can't was not a word. And she said this: if you think that you can, you will. And if you don't think you can, you won't. And whichever way that you choose, that becomes your truth. So fast forward, I had made a series of choices up to that time in my life, and I was not in a good space. And to paraphrase a movie, The Lion King, I was much more than what I had become at that time. I was separated from my wife at that time. I had just had my second child. I was penniless. I was about to be evicted from my apartment. The only thing that I had going for me was the promise that I made to my mom before she died that I would finish my college education. So I was enrolled in Tulane at the time, and that's all I had. I mean, literally, that's all I had going for me. One of the projects that I had was for a class in marketing, and I had to interview a lady named Hope Enclade, and she ran a business called Dress for Success, and their mission was to supply women who were challenged economically with business attire for interviews so they could break their cycle of poverty. Super excited in what Hope was doing, and glad that I had the opportunity to speak with her, and showed up at her office for the interview. And while we were talking, Hope stops and she started to speak, and she asked me a question, and it was the beginning of a huge change in my life. And she asked me, she goes, "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it looks like it's too heavy to bear." Don't know what I was saying, don't know what I was doing to put that out there, but she caught me. And I remember responding with, "Yes, I am in trouble. I'm in overwhelm, and I'm drowning." Her response changed the course of my life, because her response was, "I've been there. I know how you feel. Let's talk." So we discussed some things, and we talked, and it was great. And she eventually gave me this suggestion about go down to the big water and pray and let it all out to God. And that's what I did. I went to the Mississippi, and I let it all out, and I cried. I went back home the next week. I finished up all my exams. The following week after that, Katrina hit. And all of my life was washed away, and it became different, and I ended up in Baton Rouge. Fast forward a little bit later, divorced, but my career had started to take off. I had finished school. I had 2 degrees from Tulane. I got remarried to my best friend. We have 3 beautiful children, and life could not have been better. Fast forward now to 2020, and it's the summer, and we start to have things happen in our nation that is now boiling over and igniting discontent among races. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Mr. Arbery. And I remember my mom telling me, if you think you can, you will. If you don't think you can, you won't. And I remember that because I said, I have to make a change for my children, because I have 2 boys out of my 5, and I'm fearful. So I started to talk to the people I did life with, my friends, about my blackness and their whiteness, and we started conversations. We started to talk, and the groups began to grow. But there was one particular couple that had a response to something that I put out on a message to the group. And what I put out there was, I have to raise my children differently than you raise yours. I have a son. My oldest son was 10 at the time, and I have to raise him differently than you guys have to raise yours. And this couple responded with me in a different way than others. They were like, one, we don't believe in racism. We don't teach our children racism. We teach our children not to see color at all. How is your son different than my son? Because we live in the same neighborhood. Our house is about the same. We do a lot of things. We travel in the same circles. So tell me how it's different. And I recall earlier in that week that I came home. It was a little bit after dark. I came home from work, and their kids were traveling the neighborhood, doing their nightly walk and riding their bikes. One was riding a bike, the other one was walking. They stopped, and we exchanged pleasantries, and everything was great, and I asked them about their parents, and they went along their way. And I thought to myself, I would never let my kids walk at night by themselves in my neighborhood. Not because I thought my children would get mugged or robbed, but I was fearful that my children would be stopped because someone felt like they did not belong. I would not let my children walk at night because when they would stop, they would be afraid because they had done nothing wrong. They would react out of their fear, and that could cause them harm. But I didn't share that with them because their reaction to my original statement, the message that I put out there for the group, the answer was sympathetic. Sympathy drives division, just like equality drives division. They leveled the playing field, and the conversation broke down. They leveled the playing field in their observations, and their response was, we're not racist, we don't teach our children racism, we don't see color, and they negated how I felt. The response that Hope gave me, which changed my life, was that of empathy. Empathy drives connection just like equity drives connection. So whenever we want to have conversations, you have to construct the conversation with what are you observing? Do you understand what you're seeing? But the critical piece is how you choose to respond. When you respond with empathy, you drive connection. It's meaningful and it's productive. If you choose to respond with sympathy, you drive division and the conversation ends. The choice is yours. Thank you.